our skaggers or front Donegal. It's like a lonely drum too. We'll get them a slip and then we'll take a sip of the rare old Mountain Dew.
Ready? Yeah, I'll give you a quick introduction. Yeah?
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Happy Friday. So this is quite a historic day, actually. I'm really happy that we're here and having this practice Viva. It's really important to have a practice Viva so you don't get shocked when you have the real Viva. And we're going to try to ask Rich some very shocking questions today as a prepper, so he won't be shocked on Wednesday. So Rich did a great job actually with his PhD. He's very, very well prepared for this day. Like, you did a great job, Rich. There's no denying that. Like, you did an outstanding job. And the examiners know this. They see his thesis, they're like, oh wow, this is a really good thesis. But they still are a little bit psychotic. And they want to get their money's worth. They don't want to let, usually they don't go in with the attitude like, oh, we're going to just make this really easy. They still want to challenge you at the Viva and ask you some difficult questions and things like that. So it does happen sometimes. I've seen it once or twice where the Viva was very easy. But usually it's not that way. It's still difficult. And because the examiners are academics, they're a little bit psychotic and they want to get their money's worth and assert their authority and all that stuff. But anyways, Rich did a great job, and I still have lots of fond memories, especially the early days. The early days were Rich and I trying really hard to figure out the data from QPC, the very messy data sets, which was a carefully designed database. But yeah, those were great days, and it was a great, everything. There were no major problems that I can remember. Everything went pretty well.
Pretty fortunate.
Everything went really. I don't remember anything going terribly wrong at that time. So yeah. Okay, so roughly I would say did Dan say how long?
Didn't give me a time necessarily. Just a short presentation. 10 minutes.
10 to 15 minutes. I would. Yeah. And one thing I will say, which is sort of standard, is examiners ask you questions in the nature of why did you do this and what did you do? PhD students are obsessed with the question, how did you do this? So they're always thinking, oh, they're going to ask me how I did this, and then they get shocked with the why did you do this thing. And that's where oftentimes the shock comes in. So I'm going to ask you, and so hopefully some other people too, are going to ask you about why you did some of the things.
Okay. Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you, Bob. So it's really great being back. I have really missed Swansea. It's strange making the leap into the real world, but it's nice being back and seeing a new campus. This is my first time actually on this new campus. So. Yeah, nice being back next to this big screen. So, as you can tell by the slide here, the title of my thesis was Visualizing the Customer Journey Through the Call Center Landscape. It's a little bit more interesting than the title might suggest, at least I think so. You're possibly already familiar with some of the research in there. Dylan's working on the same data set, working with the same company. But as an introduction to this, to my thesis, essentially, I started my PhD in October of 2015. As I said, we're working as a collaborative project with a company called QPC. They are based up in North Wales, and they essentially manufacture a database that links in with call centres and records all the numerical values from the call centre. They have a bunch of clients such as Virgin Media, Vodafone, and that's essentially what they do. But they collect this data, and then it sort of lies on servers, and no one really does anything with it. So we were brought on board. Actually, I was a research assistant for about 10 months, playing about this data and trying to unlock some sort of hidden value that was within the data that hadn't previously been seen. In addition to QPC, it's also part funded by KES, which I know a number of you are KES funded. KES is an ESF fund, the European Social Fund, good old Europe, funding. They essentially they link together academia and industry, and partner in these organisations together, and trying to boost the Welsh economy through that. So these two people mainly have been funding it, and the goal of the project. So the objective really was, when we were given this data first off, it was a little bit of an unknown. They've done a bit of numerical analysis on it. They've never really done any graphs, any visualization, maybe a standard line charts or scatter plots or that sort of thing, but nothing in any great detail. So the idea was, we wanted to create some bespoke visual analytics software applications that were to draw out some of the hidden value within the data, maybe see some trends and patterns, and to essentially work out some of the value within the data. And it's using novel visualization techniques. That's the research aspect of it, is that it couldn't be visualization methods that are already well established, as to use sort of new and unique methods. And we're actually the first to develop these visualization methods in the call center community. So in the whole field of visualization, there hasn't actually been any research published of call center data analysis. So we were the first to do that. And then later on, about a year into the project, we were given a data set that held what's called the Net Promoter Score, which is essentially a customer feedback measure. And we were given that about a year in, so this is the final 2/3 of the project, and we actually worked with this new data set that contained a lot more, and had a lot more sort of possibility there. Hello there. Hey. Yeah, so the data set, I know you've probably seen this slide a million times, you guys, but and especially the examiners have also read it, but the data is essentially, the call data can be broken down into 4 events, basically. The IVR event, which is, you call up a call centre, your computer voice will navigate you through, hopefully, to the right department. There's a queue event, which is self-explanatory, it's you sitting in the queue waiting to talk to an agent. And then there's an agent event, which is actually sitting talking to an agent. The hold event is you're still talking to an agent, but they've ceased the communication so they can process something on their end. Each event has a duration, it can be 0, but in addition to this sort of event metrics, there are also a bunch of metadata values, such as the customer feedback, and there's call costings, and there's lots of other additional metadata values in the data set. At the bottom you can see a brief graphic on what a call might look like. You go into the IVR, spend a bit of time in the queue, talk to an agent, place it on hold for a little bit, and then the agent returns to finish the call. Throughout this PhD, we've evaluated the software through domain expert feedback. So rather than doing a user study, we've actually gone to the people who gave us the data, people that should know the data, and they can actually use the software for themselves and to explore it as they've never seen it before. So they can actually give a true evaluation as to whether the software is good, because if it can produce some interesting results, if they can produce something they've not seen before, then we count it as a success. And it was a good feedback process where they'd say, oh, this feature is useful, this feature might not be as useful. And it was an iterative process where maybe halfway through the development we would show them what we were doing, they'd say, oh, we like this, or actually I'd like this direction, that'd be more useful, to ensure that we were on track with the goals of our industry partners. The thesis structure, there's the introduction and conclusion, but within that, the main body of the thesis, there's a literature review where we summarised we tried to collect together all instances of business data visualization. Then there are 3 software development chapters. There's 3 software application chapters. Then there's the software development chapter, which is just a little library that I wrote. And then there's chapter 7 is sort of an analysis of my experience working with both industry and academia. So, the literature review. This was actually by far the largest project of the PhD. It took 3 and a bit years to publish. We finally got it published now. We recently had it published in the Information Journal at the end of last year. And we've collected all the visualization business data literature together, and we've classified it in business intelligence, business ecosystem, and then customer-centric visualizations. And then within that, we've split the data out into the data source, so whether it's primary, secondary, or hybrid data, which is web scrape data. And we've done that because I think it's helpful to know if the research was done the data was collected as a result of the research, or if the data was collected and someone came on after the fact and worked on it for visualizations. So to say, this was recently published at the end of last year, and it includes just over 70 papers. The first software development chapter, this software, I started writing shortly after I started the PhD. There was an older version of the software that I ended up rewriting completely from scratch. Actually, after a feedback session with Ben Schneiderman, we sat down and it had some sort of pointers and tips as to where we should go with it, and I ended up rewriting it in a different way. And this is the result. So, as you can see, it's using a tree map visualization, and the idea of it, you get a big overview, 24 hours of data, and you can zoom into any of these nodes and you can start to see at a granular core level the data. So the idea is a bit of a Ben Schneiderman approach of overview, and then you can zoom in and filter and see the smallest units of data. There are filters on this side, and there's a histogram on the left to see the core volume. Basically, the overview here is that each box here represents an hour. There are 24 boxes for 24 hours, and then the size of the tree map within the box shows the core volume within that hour. So it sort of starts here at midnight and ends here at midnight and goes across. So the largest core volume is about 1 o'clock here. So this was published at the Smart Tools and Apps for Graphics. This is a fun conference in Genoa. And actually, after we've published this, we we rewrote it for The Conversation. I don't know how many of you are familiar with The Conversation. It's an online it's a website that they publish articles that have been research converted into a bit more of a journalistic form. So Bob and I went through and sort of converted this research into this sort of journalistic article. So we finished this, and so we had the overview there where we could zoom in and see the calls at a granular level. But actually, what we really wanted to see is a bunch of metadata in the background that you couldn't see. So our next project was using the n-dimensional visualization method of parallel coordinates that took every single aspect of the call and laid them out on the screen, where we could use advanced brushing and filtering techniques to actually really narrow the scope of the calls down and have full control over what you're looking at. So using this method, we created some interesting brushing techniques and a unique way to sort of interact with the parallel coordinates. And it allowed us to see new, unique patterns that hadn't previously been seen before. There were trends in the data that hadn't been observed. We found sort of problems in the recording software, the sort of database software that QPC manufactured. We found problems in the staffing schedule. We found that actually in the previous software as well. So you sort of highlight sort of real-world problems within the data set. We published this at the TDCG journal at the start of 2018. And actually Bob presented it in October at this conference as well, which I'm very jealous I didn't get to go to. So the final software application chapter was sort of the result of, we had the name for the thesis, and it's the customer journey. And really, when you're talking about the customer isn't just one call necessarily, it could be a string of multiple calls. So the motivation for this one was really that we'd seen the data itself, but actually if you look at the customer as a person as opposed to just a call, we link the calls together, and we use the flow of a Sankey diagram, where we link each call together, and you can see the full journey of the customer as that moves along there. The idea of this one was that each state, so what state the customer is in, whether they're in the IVR, the queue, or talking to an agent, or any of these things, the flow of the calls would move, so you could see generally where the customers were moving. So if they were all moving to hang up at a certain point, you could see that there was either a problem there or whatever they were asking had been resolved. So this was presented at the CGVC conference in Swansea University that I know most of you were at, and actually won Best Paper as well, this one. So that was a nice sort of closing software application for the thesis there. The next chapter was also presented at the same conference, but this is it was the result of when we first started creating the tree map application back at the beginning. Bob asked me to improve the colour management in it. And I sat down and thought, well, I can do this now, but that's a question I'm going to be asked every time I create anything, really. So I sort of designed it with reusability in mind, and actually over the years, over the 3 years, it turned into this little header library where you could easily sort of, in less than 2 minutes, we got a video that hopefully the reviewers would have seen, where you could import it into your project and include in just a few lines of code, sort of a robust and powerful colour map method. So yeah, and that was the goal, and it turned into this header-only library that. And the paper in this chapter really goes through sort of the use case of how it's used. And it covers most bases. You can do all the data types. There are different types of colour maps. You can use colour classes, or it can be more of a smooth interpolated colour map. So there are lots of. It's relatively feature rich. It's got some ways to go. But I know some of you in this room have previously used it. I don't know if you still do. But that was the idea of this chapter. So the final main chapter was. It was an analysis of, over the 3 years, I've worked closely with QPC, the company, but I was very aware that we did have different goals. You look at academia, and what the output of academia is they want to publish papers, and I want to get my PhD, and to do that I really need to publish papers and write, and that essentially means that everything I learn I want to put out into the public domain. But in industry that's not necessarily the case. If you give out your trade secrets, you're losing your competitive edge. So there's this dichotomy of interest there of what I wanted to do, and it's also that to get published papers, you need to be novel, you need to be unique, you need to sort of think creatively. But for a lot of businesses, they don't have time for that because they want to have the quickest turnaround possible. But also, it's a risk. If you create something new, as opposed to something that's already been well established to be good, then that's not necessarily something that they'll want. So this paper is sort of an analysis of how those two link together and how you collaborate effectively. It makes some suggestions, and it's specifically from the perspective of visualization, because that's the perspective I came from. It could be opened out into a few more, a little bit broader subject area. But this was published at the IVAP conference in Madeira at the start of last year, I think about a year ago, almost to the day. Went along there with Chow. It was a fun conference. So that was sort of the finishing off of the thesis, and sort of a reflective looking at how the whole project went. So, in summary, we were able to be the first people to publish this research, the visualization research, in call center data analysis. We've produced 3 visual analytics applications, all containing various sort of novel aspects to them, and actually created them with industry in mind. So they're not just purely for the sake of academia. It's also got some real-world value as well. We validated these methods using domain expert feedback, which sort of backs up the point of its real-world value as opposed to its hypothetical value if it was just evaluated through the user study. And the other main thing I'd like to point out is that each main chapter has been published, so it's at least been peer-reviewed, so the work has been looked over at least by a few academics, and any sort of major problems along the way it's been corrected. I'm not actually sure how long that was, but it was a very quick summary. Thank you very much for listening. Do you have any questions? What time is that?
14 minutes and 40 seconds, which is fine.
Okay.
Maybe it'll be a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
Nervous.
Yeah.
So who wants to ask the first questions? I have some tough questions. I have some questions I've written down that you must be prepared for. Like, you have
ready.
no options.
I'm ready. I know you're going to ask some difficult ones, and you probably are as well. So.
What is data visualization?
Still on the box there, I imagine. It's funny. So this question has been asked. I've been asked this a few times since going into the job that I've recently started. I've been asked that a few times, and it's funny because it's something that when I describe it, they say, "Oh, so it's like a bar chart." And you know, well, yes, to a certain extent, but it is a little bit more than that. It's sort of the creative process behind intelligently designing a graphic so that it's not just doing a standard implementation of a bar chart, but it's saying, what is the best thing to do in this scenario? How am I going to best present this data? How am I going to unlock the value hidden within? If it's big data, there's a lot of value there in visualization. But essentially the depiction of data in a way that it's accessible to people that don't necessarily understand the data. So statistical analysis is sometimes out of the realms of possibility to understand for a lot of people, me included. So visualization is a way of simplifying something complicated through a visual medium.
I'd say that's reasonable.
Good.
Pretty prepared for that one.
Okay.
What is data?
What is data?
Why?
Why?
Why is data?
Why did you use the tree map?
The tree map. So the tree map was the first project that we worked on. Actually, when I started as a research assistant, I started writing the tree map software, and it very quickly became, because I wanted to provide an overview of the data, and I really liked the tree map. I thought it was a very clever way of visualizing hierarchical data, but my data didn't have a hierarchy in it. So I thought, well, did a bit of blue sky thinking. I thought, well, what could I use for the hierarchy? And actually, we ended up using a hierarchy of time. There's an hour, and then we had 10-minute slots, then we had minute slots. And we thought, I wonder what that would look like. How could you show the sort of volume of data within that? So that's how it started. I wanted to use a tree map to show a unique hierarchy. So that's how it really started, but actually the tree maps, we ended up getting feedback from Bench9 when he very kindly sat down. And at the stage that he sat down, it wasn't a particularly well-developed piece of software, and it had a few glaring problems, and visually it wasn't very good. Usability wasn't fantastic. So he gave us a few points to change. I think I ended up writing a short paper on it, submitted it to Eurovision, and didn't get in. And I remember over the Christmas break thinking, I need to do something here. I need to sort of really give this a go and revamp it. So I started a new project, rewrote it again, using the recommendations from Bench9 for usability, and that's sort of brought it into what we saw there. And that's why we use the tree maps.
By the way, can I just say something there?
Yeah.
You can say that, and it's okay, that's all.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I think it would be a little bit better to say, because I have a similar question, it's sort of a trick question. Why did you use a tree map as a starting point?
Okay.
However, it wasn't the start.
Yes, it wasn't. You're right, it wasn't the start.
It wasn't the start. You tried other experiments before.
That's even in the thesis, they'll know that. So if I say it was the starting point, it'll look really bad. Yeah. So actually, so we when we first started, I think the reason I said because this was back when I was a research assistant, so it was before the PhD started. But we created a few little, it was histograms and we did a chord diagram, and we did a few little things to sort of visualize how the data looked, even using things like MATLAB, actual tools that existed, to take a look at what the data generally looked like, without looking into sort of the specifics, the trends and the patterns. But the first few little applications that we wrote were just sort of to get to know the data and to look into it. The first step that we did, as I said earlier, a huge amount of the first few months was I wrote a data dictionary and went through and took their data set, and every single field I would write up something about. And 10 minutes later they gave us a completely different data set. So it was, but that was helpful to get to know, and I think it was from that, these little visualization methods, that we wanted to try something substantial and something more meaningful than just a bar chart.
Also, I have the tree map, since we have the tree map. It's just you said, I think you said it's at the first it's not really suitable for tree map, but you have the tree map before the usefulness of your data, and so you kind of fuse your data to suit the tree map. I'm not sure if this will be satisfying for the viewers.
Well, I think that there's. Sorry.
Yes, just a point.
I think it's with visualization especially, there is a creative aspect to it, and it wasn't that we didn't know if it was suitable or not. We didn't know that if we were to break it down this way, if it would work or not. Well, I think it worked. It wasn't perfect. There were holes in it certainly, but we didn't. If we'd have tried it and it really didn't work at all, then we would have abandoned it and moved on to something else. But there was enough there for us to think well, actually, let's carry on with this. This hasn't really been done before. And that's the reason why we continued with it, is that we wanted to see if it would work or not, if it was suitable.
So just let's not.
Sorry.
Can I just say, I have a similar question written down.
Okay.
Why did you design the tree map hierarchy the way you did? It's basically a similar question. If I were you, I would say something like, well, the tree map wasn't first. We did what you said. We tried some experiments just to try to understand the data itself.
Yeah.
The characteristics of the data. We tried histograms, we tried chord diagrams, we tried also the timeline.
Yeah.
Time on X and duration on Y.
Yeah.
And they all failed to give us an overview.
Yeah.
That logically says, okay, the tree
like
map
that,
is the one that can provide an overview. That's one point. And the second point is, they gave you 24 hours of data.
Yeah.
So that is a very logical hierarchy. 24, 1 day, 1 hour, 1 minute, 1 second. Like it's a very, at least in my mind.
Yeah.
So you could tell that as a kind of a logical justification for these things.
That's a better answer, I like.
They're gonna. I have those written down, and the audience is asking the same questions. So chances are you're going to get those same questions.
Okay.
I'm guessing.
So you present most of your work as novel ideas, right?
Yeah.
In visualization. So how did you evaluate each one?
So we evaluated them through the domain expert feedback. So we took these the applications to our industry partner, and sort of using their data, they could use the software and explore it, because it's a way that they haven't explored it before. So it was basically how effective it was at discovering new things, or being able to basically their contentment with it. If they'd gone, oh, well, that didn't show us anything we didn't already know. So we knew that if it's novel, that's sort of something that doesn't need a user study to prove that it's novel, but whether it's useful or not. And we proved the usefulness through these domain expert feedback sessions. And we kept it on track. Each one we did, we tended to do a few feedback sessions throughout the development process. So I think even one of them, there was 3 feedback sessions extended over periods of time where they would say, well, we really like these features, it'd be good if you could add this in, or like little tweaks that just make it even more useful to people. So that was how we evaluated.
So, my question about TreeMap as well. So, because I'm working on TreeMap, I should ask this question. So, I know that, like, you show each hour with 1 square.
Yeah.
And how did you show this internal and leaf node? I mean, my question is basically what kind of tree map you use.
What kind of tree map?
Yes.
So we use the slice and dice method of tree maps, where it maintains an order.
Mm-hmm.
So when you zoom in here, this is obviously a static image in the thesis, there is a little graphics there, I can show the video. Where you could, if you click on these, there is a lot more to it than just this one screenshot. You zoom into one of these hours and it brings out each individual call record. And the way we did that was the slice and dice method, so that the top left leaf node, was the first call in that minute, and the bottom right was the last call in that minute, go across left to right. And we found that was, you could have done the other methods, the squarified methods, but that mixes the order up. So we quite liked having the order, because we're using time as a duration. It made more sense to use one where you could maintain that duration, because I know that the squarified is visually more appealing, but the slice and dice was more useful in this case. Yeah.
Hold on. You can't say that. You're not using the slice and dice.
Why not?
You're using the ordered tree map layout algorithm. She was asking which layout algorithm do you use. It's not slice and dice.
Which one's slice and dice?
Slice and dice is vertical, horizontal, vertical,
Oh,
horizontal.
you're right.
Yes.
That would be a bad mistake to make.
You're lucky it's not there, because I would have been called out.
That would have been awkward, wouldn't it?
So you're using the ordered
We use the order tree maps.
no
It's the first
layout.
one. It was if I'm honest, it was the easiest one to implement, but I won't tell that to the examiners. Because I was just starting out when I first did it.
Yeah.
And it does make more sense to do that way. But you're right, it is the,
You don't want to say
it is
that.
the order one.
My question is,
And the reason is because the events are ordered.
Yeah.
That's why you do
You said ordered because it started from the first minute till the last minute.
Yeah.
So
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
that's maybe wrong.
I remember how I just real names of the layout methods. It's been a long time since I've been with this. 2 years.
my question was going to be pretty similar. I was just going to ask why you're not using a squeak filling tree map.
So this is, so each one of these are individual tree maps. So if we'd have used, if we'd have merged that all into one, you would lose out on being able to see the core volume in each hour. I think I actually tried this. I did do it once, and it didn't work very well. It didn't look very good because of sort of these very small hours. You'd just see just one big blob, and it would be more difficult to say, oh well, then this is 1 o'clock, and this is, you know, as time goes up, you know, the core volume increases. So they're 24 separate tree maps, not one big.
Well, I'm just saying, yeah, go for it. You can also say, but it is screen filling. As soon as you click on a node, boom, it
Yeah.
fills the entire screen.
That's true.
But the first answer is to reflect the call volume in each hour.
Okay, I wanted to ask you about because you mentioned in your presentation about the interactions with industry and how the interest might not always coincide. And considering that all this work is novel and is done specifically, you say it's the first work done on call center data, I would assume that for a company, this could give them an edge, this kind of analysis. This would be something they might want to keep private or something like that. So I was wondering if there was any occasion in which you were interested in the mine and how you handled that.
So I think we were very fortunate. Our company, QPC, they're a really good company to work with. The way that it sort of worked is that at the end we hand them these software applications, and then they'll use them in the case of if they'll go to customers and they'll say, well, we have these applications that can be used. A lot of the time, what they wanted out of this relationship was it was a knowledge transfer. So we go to them, we'd show them these things, and they started working on their own visualization and a dashboard thing that they were working on. So it was less of the code that I was writing they were explicitly using, but it was sort of the theory behind learning and the relationship being formed, and the knowledge transfer to them that they were using for their own products. So that's sort of how we got around the sort of the difference in interests, and they were very happy to they got that, and anything in addition, if they got, you know, papers associated with them, they were happy with that. That was okay. Yeah. Is it not about tree maps?
Tree maps is the
I hate
easiest
that
one.
paper. I hate that paper so much.
Won't be so
Getting
bad.
flashbacks. Well,
It's the
I think
same.
by the end it was the software. I just didn't want to touch it because it would break the
You
segmentation.
worked on it for almost a year.
It's I think the most controversial visualization you pick, the tree map and the bar coordinates, they're always kind of controversial and
Yeah.
not always well received.
Yeah.
What's the design justification of this? Why you choose bar coordinates?
Parallel coordinates. So it was because we'd started off with this. We started off with the tree maps, where you could see an overview of the data, and it was this sort of frequency-based approach where everything was summed together. But what we really wanted to see was the metadata hidden behind the events. So largely, the tree map stuff worked mostly on time. It was almost like a timeline, and you can see that, you know, you can colour by one extra metric. So it's coloured currently by, I think that's the abandon rate. But with this, you can put every single metadata value in one screen. You can see it all. And when you're exploring it, you want to narrow down, you want to see trends and patterns. You want to be able to filter by all of those measures at the same time. So we did have these sliders on the right in this software, where you could filter by those measures, but you could filter by it, but you couldn't see the trends as well. So this was more of a, you could see, start and zoom in and look at a very small subset. This was, you could see, it could be a small subset, but of any time frame. And that was the reason why we chose it, was to be able to look at the n-dimensional aspect of the data.
Bob mentioned that you looked at 24 hours of data for the tree maps. How much data were you able to look at from what they provided you?
So in this one, well, this one was 24 hours. We ended up getting a month of data, so I know Dylan's more the expert at looking at the months of data. So this one we did load a month of data into this one. It was very, very slow. Because it wasn't designed to handle that sort of size or scale. But we could load in, I think I tried a week, and it would handle it reasonably well. Certain features were a little bit slow, but this was time independent. So there is a start time and end time axis here, but this is cumulative, so if it doesn't look at the data at all, so it wouldn't show lots and lots of bumps there. It would show one big, the frequency bar there would show all the calls between midnight to midnight rather than looking at individual dates. So this could theoretically, given a more powerful computer, could show any amount of data within the limits of the GL.
I could be wrong, but as far as I know, you show each software to your funding,
Yep.
QPC, right?
Yep.
So when you show tree map and parallel coordinates, which one was better for them? I mean,
So they preferred the parallel coordinates. The tree maps I think they liked because it was the first sort of visualizations that they'd seen of their software properly. But this was the one that they could look into and say, we had the most discussions with this one, where we'd see something and they'd see the pattern, and we'd sit for quite a while and they'd go, well, do you think it was this, or do you think this was the technical process that happened? And because we haven't worked in a call centre before, but they all had. They're the ones that could really analyse the visualization. And I think this was one that was the most helpful for them. In a more general sense, actually the following one. So this one was helpful for them from a customer perspective because they hadn't necessarily chained the customers together in one stream before, so I think that was unique to them in that sense. But from a pattern observation and sort of just seeing something and thinking, well, what's that, and having a meaningful discussion about it, I think they prefer this one.
you can see 1 month data on this, and they don't need small time to like extract the general information. That's why they need a bigger picture.
Yeah.
That's why. Yeah, it makes sense.
Did you look into dealing with any clutter issues with what left images and web clutter? So I was wondering what kind of...
Yes, so the bottom left, this image here was supposed to show when all the data was in there, and if you wanted to apply brushes there. So the idea of this one is that you get an awful lot of overplotting. You just put that amount of data onto parallel coordinates, you get a lot of overplotting. So the research really focused on how to remove that overplotting and to filter the results down. In terms of clutter removal, we did certain filters. We applied various different things to say, well, if this is obviously false information, so we had these machine calls that would come through, and it's a very consistent call that came through and ended after a few seconds. And that would clog up a lot of the screen. So we could filter those out initially, but this research was really focused on taking this overplotted image and filtering it down to something that you could actually see and understand.
What is a Sankey diagram?
Oh, Sankey diagram. So, a Sankey diagram is essentially it's a state transition diagram. It shows the flow of it's typically shown as a frequency-based approach, flowing from one state to another. So, mostly used really. Actually, D3, the JavaScript visualization library, has a Sankey diagram built in. I think most of the ones that I see online are from that. It's basically a way of saying, you have 100 people and splitting out into different groups, but you can see it move down, and you can split by male and female, go further down in there, and you can say what course they study, and it sort of splits out. It's almost like a hierarchical visualization. But in this case, it was more of a state transition where you could split out here. These are all the people that called the call center. And about half of them went down to call end. This thing here is call end. But then half of them went into the queue. And then from there, a certain number of them went into the agent, and then half of those hung up, and then half of them were placed onto hold. So the cycle diagram is really just a state transition that shows the flow of state transition.
What insights do you got from? Is there any like big insights?
Insights.
Like on the visual.
So with this one, the insights actually were more along these. It's a little bit more intricate. It took a while for them to get when we were showing them the feedback. But it's the lines that sort of come down here. They're these thin lines that represent a smaller number of callers. But with the filtering methods we put in place, you can filter the metadata or click directly on these nodes to turn them on and off. And you can see that very, very clearly the biggest effect. People get bounced around between agent to agent. Other people are going to be very unhappy. As I'm sure you can imagine, you can see the effect which it has on the customers because we have the feedback score. So you can see that people that go this route here, they call IVR, queue, agent, hang up. They're the ones that can be very happy. Typically, you speak to an agent for 5 minutes and then they say, oh yeah, that's been solved for you. It's the people down here that have to call back, the effect of having to call back and hanging up thinking the problem's resolved and then... I know this sounds like it is obviously it's intuition, we already knew that, but you can see the extent to which that is the case. The video that came along with this was what demonstrated that. There are a bunch of additional things as well, so there's this sort of tracking method. You can hold over a node and you can see where sort of all of these calls came from. So you can see a certain percentage came through there, and you can actually see the full track, full trace route of the calls. Yeah, absolutely.
Can you tell me what the difference is between an alluvial diagram and Sankey diagram?
A what?
Alluvial diagram and Sankey
I've
diagram.
never heard of that one. That is I'll have to Google it.
I don't know the answer to that either. What is it called?
Alluvial?
I don't know that one. It's probably the same.
It's just that one is only one directional and the other one is
cyclical. Which one's cyclical?
Alluvial, I believe.
Okay, didn't know that. Probably should have.
I was looking at the Sankey diagram a while back and I found out this thing, so...
Okay, yours is very cyclical.
Sorry?
Yours is very cyclical.
Mine's very cyclical. But it isn't in that. It is important to note that this is the third stage of the transition. So if it was cyclical, if someone's called back, they merge in with the people who called first time. So we couldn't use a cyclical visualization in this case.
I never understand the call center data.
Yeah.
But I would ask a question. You said at the beginning that the idea of the Sankey diagram is to connect customers.
Yes.
What do you mean by this?
So out of this bar here, there is these are all the people who called in. I think this is it's either 24 hours or 2 weeks. I don't know. So all the people that called, and then these are the people that hang up straight away. This little bar here going from the hang up, there's a much smaller one going back up into the IVR, are the people who called back. So we've linked them together through this little bar here. So when you apply filters, that bar gets bigger because you can change the proportion. You can see, you can filter it by everyone who hung up at the end. Or if you click here as well, if you filter by this one, you can see everyone who's called back at least once. And it's interesting that actually, if they've hung up here, the vast majority of callers will just go from IVR to hang up, IVR to hang up, IVR to hang up. And actually, that's a little bit of a machine call learn. But if they call 10 times, that's very strange to hang up, not speak to anyone, not enter the queue in any way. They might be getting information. IVRs sometimes give you some valuable information, details or something like that. Or you might be able to top up your phone or something like that in the IVR. But to call back 10 times a day is possibly machine data. But it's the people who go IVR, queue, agent, hang up, and these people who call back, this line here, you can look at and say, these are the people who have spoken to someone and yet still felt the need to go through the nightmare of a process, pressing the right buttons or in the wrong queue, and so you can actually look at these customers and say, and say that those people are probably going to be a little bit unhappy that they've had to call.
just takes a while. So.
Scan.
Yeah.
So the dataset have any rating at the end of the call or like
They
measuring how happy the customer is?
Yes, so they have this thing called the Net Promoter Score. So some of you might have experienced it. It's basically if you call, I know Virgin Media do it, so if you finish a call with them, they will send you a text saying on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend us to a friend? And it was, I don't know, what is the percentage of people that respond? About 5%, is it? It's not
So,
really.
yeah, 5 sounds reasonable.
So you didn't include
Yes, we did. So some of the, well, actually everything, the parallel coordinates and the Sankey diagram, that's included in there. It's often done through colour, so the colour dimensions are used. But the user can select, it can be the feedback score. They also invented something called the customer effort score, which is sort of like a derived measure where they take, it's just a single value that represents how much effort the customer has gone into. If they've been in the queue for an hour and a half and then they've been transferred through to lots of different agents, that's you can tell that's a nightmare call. They've tried to quantify that. So QPC have done that and they've given us that as well. So a large part of the parallel coordinates project was to validate the customer effort score against the Net Promoter Score, because obviously we don't have the Net Promoter Score for every caller, but we do have the customer effort score for every caller. So if that could accurately portray the Net Promoter Score, then that'd be a really valuable thing to them. In reality, I think we realised it sort of shows something slightly different. It's not necessarily the Net Promoter Score, because people who are unhappy with the service are going to be unhappy with the service regardless, even if they were the people who talked to an agent quickly and hung up. Chances are they're still not going to be overly happy with the service. Because if you're calling up and you have a problem, that's the thing that's going to make them unhappy, not the service they receive and trying to fix the problem. So that's something that's obviously it's a little bit more of the behavioural economist research. That's something that the QPC are interested in, is how the groups of people and how they interact.
When you got the data, do you go through any data processing steps like the cleaning to handle null data or outlier detection, things like those?
So before the data is handed over to us, it's anonymised. They sort the customer IDs and the names. Like we don't get any names or anything like that, but so that's a little bit processed. In terms of cleaning the data, we tend to do that on the fly. We want to be able to load in the customer data set directly into the software, because if we were to process it beforehand, it wouldn't be of much use to them. Because if we were to hand it over to them and they'd load their own data in, they'd say, well, this makes no sense, there's noise everywhere. So the cleaning step was often done on the fly if we would balance checking if a call was too long and gave well, that's probably not right, or if this customer has 120 calls in one day, then it's probably not a good customer. So things like that, we would put balance checking in after the load-in process, but before the visualization.
I wouldn't be afraid to mention the data dictionary. Like, may as well talk about that. Yeah, you did, but like in reference to because that was an exercise in just trying to understand data, because there's so many different aspects.
Yeah. So the first data set we were given was more complicated than the one that we worked with at the end. And all the field names in the database weren't descriptive in any way. And a lot of the time we go to them and say, well, what does this one mean? And they go, well, I think it's probably something to do with this. And these are the people that are in charge of the data. They don't have any documentation. I know I shouldn't have that company. Probably not a good idea. But it's it was a challenge there in that the documentation was somewhat limited. So that's why we wrote the data dictionary, to sort of overcome that. And that was helpful for the first sort of year then. We used the data dictionary every time I needed to access any variables, because it's as complicated, it's got 14 different tables in the database, and if you want to go from one value over here to another value in the table, you have to go sort of four or five tables, go through 4 or 5 tables to get to it. It's just computationally very expensive, so it was helpful to have. Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning that you did some visualizations before getting to the free map. So I was wondering, what are exploratory visualizations you did or technique you used to understand the...
So we did, the first one I did, the first proper one I did was a histogram. So I just wanted to see how the data fell. We were given 24 hours of data. I just wanted to see, generate the... Because actually I started the project and we weren't even given the data. I found my own call center data set and visualized that. And it was just a histogram that showed the callers throughout the day and changed the width of the bar of the histogram. And sort of dynamically update that. And that's the first thing we did because actually at that point I had no idea what the data looked like. I've never really given any thoughts to what the volume of call, when the busiest time in the call center was. I'd never really thought about it before. So we moved on to a visualization that was more of a sort of like a glyph-based approach. It was on a timeline and each call was positioned on the timeline and each event was drawn. It was like a stacked bar chart, but the x-axis was time. So it was an odd-looking one. We never pursued that enough to get it where it was aesthetically particularly pleasing. But there are a few things we looked at in that. We saw that there were a few points where the software stopped working, or either it stopped working. There's a time where calls were still coming in, but no agents were there. Presumably there's a fire alarm or something. So these very naive methods we did use, but ultimately we moved on to the software.
So a special question, it has 2 stars next to it.
Okay.
What did you learn about customers and their calls and their behavior from the visualization work you did?
Okay. I'll actually come back on here. Is that off, do you think?
No.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so let's go back. Yeah, so this one of the interesting things, I assumed that if you were to think now, like, when is the busiest time to call a call centre? When do you not want to call them? Realistically, it's the evening, because everyone gets off work. Everyone, after this, I've got to call my car insurance and tell them not to renew because they're thieving, awful. But I know that it's going to be a nightmare if I call this evening, so I want to call preferably as early as possible. I couldn't this morning, I can't now. But actually, if you look at the volume of calls here, so this is sort of the evening into the night, and it does decrease with time. But so the colour here is the average abandon rate. How likely are you to hang up? This maps fairly well with how long they've had to queue. So whilst the duration or volume of calls incoming goes down, it increases the amount of time people have to hang up. They're less busy, but realistically there's less staff. So what we noticed was there was this red patch around here, and this is about, I think, about 1:10 in the afternoon, just when people go on their lunch break, and I thought, well, it's going to be an increased volume of calls. Everyone's going on their lunch break and calling. But actually, I think everyone's really clued into thinking, oh, it's lunchtime, everyone's going to be calling right now. There isn't a particular increase in the volume of calls there, because I mean, there's this sort of between 20 past and half past there has far more calls coming in. But they queued a lot more then. So when we looked into it, it turns out that it was the call centre wasn't, when the agents in the call centre were going on their lunch break, they weren't staggering it properly. So we found that it's ridiculous. Everyone in the call said, all right, well, it's 1 o'clock, I'm going on my lunch break. They didn't say, all right, you guys go on your lunch break and you guys go in 20 minutes and you guys... So that's what we found there.
Thank you. No, because I had this theory for a long time, because at lunch it was the worst time, and they would say, oh, this call is important, you're in the queue, and they would just keep you for hours, and I'm like, they're all at lunch, I know that.
It's a bit of information I found the other day. That, you go to a call centre, you're on a hold, and you're getting in a hold for a while, and they'll show you this really awful quality music, and it sounds terrible. And potentially, I had one the other day, but it was about 4 or 5 seconds, sometimes it's 10 or 15 seconds. The voice will come and say, thank you, your call is important to us. God. And it's infuriating because you go, oh no, it's just the voice again. And they do that to wind you up so you hang up, so to reduce the volume in the queues. I called someone the other day and you got about maybe a second of music before things start again.
In order of everything that is annoying, the voice saying, we'll answer your call shortly. I'm like, yeah, that's why I'm holding, so stop saying it.
Did you know most of our queries when you answered on the website?
It drives me insane. Oh, the worst are the government one, when you press the number. It said, oh, if you want this, press the number. You press the number, it's like, go to a website.
Yeah, I hate that. And then hangs up on you. Oh. call centres, I don't
That's
know.
why you always say
Anything else
another
that you
until they
learned?
go,
Anything else we learned? So, some of the fun things we learned. So actually, one of the things that we could validate was about customer behaviour. It was really, there's the theory of the net promoter score. There are people that are just unhappy. Like they're made unhappy if you have to call up a call centre because you've got a technical problem. They're made unhappy because they've got a technical problem. There's no amount of money you could throw at the call centre to make their life any better, unless you've got a free service for a year or something. I don't know. It's essentially the groups of people that if they get a good service on the phone, the problem is resolved, they're happy, they'll recommend it to their friends because they understand sometimes things go wrong. So you can see the clear divide here. This is a visualization of the net promoter score. And the two groups of people, and actually, in this brush, there's not a huge amount of well, it's quite noisy. There's a lot of variation, but here you can see a solid strip there of blue that goes down. Blue is a negative net promoter score. So there's a period here in that time where in the call centre when people gave a lot of very bad customer feedback scores. So when we don't know what it's been anonymised to the point where we don't know where this call centre was. We don't know what happened. We don't have the full feedback of because that includes customer information. But using this, if we'd use this live, we could highlight in real time something's going wrong right here. Like is there a new guy maybe being really rude, or is something not being routed through? They've been on the line for ages, or has someone thought they've hung up and said something really bad about people? I don't know. Like there's lots of things that could be going wrong there. So there are a lot of things that we discovered and that we talked about for quite a while within our meetings with QPC. And I think had that been if this was a Virgin Media data set, had Virgin Media on the line, the people in that call centre, and they remember the day, they'd be able to say, oh yes, I do remember what happened. But obviously, because this was all anonymised, we weren't able to do that. We were able to theorise and maybe have a think about what might be causing these problems. I suppose that is the limitation.
You keep saying Virgin Media.
Yeah, so Virgin Media is one of their customers. I don't know. This one, I can't remember. This one might be Vodafone. I can't remember. It's all anonymised to the point where I don't know. I don't know if you know, is this one Vodafone or is this Virgin? It's Vodafone, okay. I think the first one was Virgin Media.
If it wasn't anonymous, it would be actually go to downdetector.com and check the negative score.
So just to comment, I recommend preparing some slides just for that question.
Okay.
That question is on, if I had to bet on one question, my money, that is the most likely one I would put my money on.
Because it's all in the thesis, so I'll be able to go through and I'll take that out of the thesis.
Yeah, I would recommend it. And you might get one that's a variation that is, can you tell me something you learned that they didn't already know?
Okay.
That you might want to. And that's, since you know those questions are coming, they're almost guaranteed you may as well have some slides prepared just in case you know this. You're handling the questions very well right now. Good. But if you know those questions are coming and you might be nervous on Wednesday and you might not be as relaxed and as ready to answer, you may as well have some slides and say, I'll just go to my slides here.
What did you learn from your survey?
Survey? Oh, of course, the king of the survey asked me that question. I know that surveys are very difficult to get published.
You conveniently skipped it.
Well,
Right from the beginning.
I think it's still just fresh in my mind. I just want to not forget.
it's there.
Well, when we asked what did you learn, you skipped the survey and went straight to the tree map.
Yeah. So,
I hope you're there on exam.
I quite like. So it's interesting. There are certain academics that focus very much in these fields. Really, the scope of this survey is quite big. So Basol et al. He's the key player, especially in the business ecosystem. So he's in most of that column. I think one of the big things we learned was that customer visualization is increasing. So over time, there is visualization. And there's a graph in a table in the survey that has the date of the publication is. And customer visualization is increasing because customer feedback is more readily available. And customer behavior is easier to track because of technology. And businesses care more about customers because the markets are so competitive. They have to provide a customer-centered product or service. Business ecosystem is somewhat dwindling. I think it's Basol et al. Is holding. Basol he's holding the business ecosystem visualization up, to be honest, because he very much focuses on that area. But then in terms of other publishers, I don't think there's not many people working on that. And then in terms of business intelligence, we found that is decreasing probably in proportion to the customer feedback. That might be to do with the fact that customer data is more interesting, and might be to do with the fact that internal intelligence is sometimes more classified. That if there is a data set that exists with customer internal intelligence, businesses probably don't want to keep it to themselves and not publish it. So really, it's the rise of the customer-centered business model where people are focusing on what are the customers doing, why are they doing it, how do they feel about their products, and what can they then do to improve, rather than what are we good at, it's what do the customers want. So that was the big... You're silly.
I'm going to ask some tricky ones. One of them's not fair.
Okay.
But you may as well go through this today. How about this one? This one's tricky. What did QPC want to learn from the data they collect?
What do they want to learn? That is a tricky question because I don't think they knew themselves. I think they didn't have one idea in mind that it was, well, we want to work out, there wasn't anything essentially. But one thing may have been, we have, about a year in when we completed the new data set, we have this customer effort metric that we've created, and we have the Net Promoter Score feedback that's populates less than 5% of calls, and we want to be able to work out how accurate the customer effort score is through visualization. So I think that was one of the main things they wanted to work on. I think really they wanted to be able to get something that looked nice because they're selling their product to customers, to call centers. So they had to have something that looked nice and something that proved itself in value. So I don't think they knew what the value in that would necessarily be because they were relatively new to visualization when we started. I think they were really looking for, later on the validation of that metric. It was just to be able to find something, some patterns or some trends in the data that they were able to take to their customer and say, hey, look at this. This visualization has saved you money.
Not a bad answer, not bad. You could also say they want to improve call center efficiency.
Yes, I suppose.
The operational efficiency of the call center. So look for any patterns of behavior that are inefficient.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's true. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I said it'd be 15 minutes.
How did this project get started with QPC?
Well, that's a question really you should answer. So it was originally TSB funded. My research assistant role was from a TSB funded project that was purely Swansea University and QPC, KES weren't involved. And I can't remember, it originally started, you guys had met.
That's the unfair question.
Yeah, it was, you guys had met, I remember that.
Yeah, so.
Did you reach out to them or they reach out to you?
This thing called the Viva Graduate School, which Jonathan Roberts was a part of, so I know all about it.
Sure.
He was even at the meeting. Jonathan Roberts was at the meeting. Yeah.
Was he really? That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Viva Graduate School organized a meeting between any industry and any academic in Cardiff, actually. The Cardiff Marriott, actually. And that's where we met, and that's how it all got started. They were looking for this.
I'm going to make a note of that name.
Yeah, it's an unfair question, but I just imagine somebody asking it anyways. You know, like you're not responsible for that knowledge.
I don't think they dock you any marks for it.
Yeah.
Any question that students
Nothing in that case. Nothing. like another answer would be, well, Bob got it started, so you have to ask him. Like that would be a perfect
I can say from the
example.
point that I came in. I joined, it was the start of December 2014. I started. And, yeah, I think just before the end of December we went up and I met the PC team. And, but at that point I think you'd been in communication for a little while.
That's right.
You've been advertised for it. So.
Maybe you can give them an answer like the database description, which is steaming. I am, at the beginning, was inspired by the cost data, and I was looking for.
Who's inspired?
Thesis Jacob.
You might also just be careful with the way you say it was just us and QPC in the beginning.
Okay.
There were two other parties involved. You might not remember it.
TSB?
There were two other companies.
Oh, there was. Oh, what are the name of them?
It's not very important, and that's not going to come up.
Yeah.
If
I wouldn't say it wasn't. You're right. I completely forgot. What's the name of them? They did virtual reality stuff.
I just can't. I actually can't remember.
They did some virtual reality. Yeah, stuff.
It was 3D InfoViz.
3D InfoViz.
It was also geospatial a little bit. I cannot remember. I want to say Didcot Parkway, but that's a train station.
I probably
it's something like Didcot Parkway.
It begins with a D, doesn't it?
Yeah,
It's
like
it,
I don't remember. It does begin with a D.
yeah.
I can't remember. And there was a consultant involved as well, an independent consultant.
Okay.
Parties, yeah. I can't remember. But I do remember I went to visit them once. I actually visited them and checked out what they were doing. Dayton, there you go. Well,
I haven't actually seen it.
How did you figure that out, Mike?
I typed in QPC virtual reality in my emails, and
okay.
it didn't actually come up with it, but suddenly remembered it from cut.
Yeah, Dayton. That's right.
And there was a consultant.
Yeah, there was a
There was,
consultant.
remember there was Alan Bennett?
Yes, he was the TSB consultant.
He was brilliant. I like that.
Okay, this sort of already came up, but it's a generic question that you're almost certainly going to get. What are some of the special challenges you face when working with industry?
So I think industry tends to have a habit of rushing things through. They want to have the next thing. They go, great, that's in a state that it's fine, move on to the next thing. Whereas research has to be sort of refined, and if you want to publish it has to go through a lot of iterative processes. So I think every time we were to meet up with them, so the parallel coordinate software took a long time to do that. And we would turn up at a meeting and they'd go, oh, you're sort of still working on this, and why have we moved on? We need to get this published, and it's good research. And I think that was one of the big things, is that I think they wanted, they were happy with the work that we produced. I think they just wanted more of it, because industry is just faster paced and they have less, their requirements are very different to ours, so it's just this difference in understanding. So I think that was the big one. There was always that feeling of going to meetings thinking, oh, I hope they're happy with this. I hope they just don't think, oh, well, come back when you've got something completely new, I don't want to look at this one again. Yeah, but they weren't like that particularly. They were very, very helpful, and every time there's a feedback process, they were happy. I think it's just that they just move a bit faster. So the other challenges working with them is that industry tends not to be as well documented, as we've already said. Their databases weren't very well documented. So that knowledge transfer was sort of delayed or a little bit staggered, because it was difficult to send emails out and say, well, what does this mean? And they're busy in meetings, because 90% of their life is filled with meetings. So yeah, so it was that was one of the big challenges. What else was there? I went down and stayed with them for, I think I spent about a week, 4 days, in their offices to see sort of how it ran. And that was, again, it was interesting, because I think they were more focused on, well, if you should, this other project that you want to work on, because they really wanted the validation of the Net Promoter Score against the customer effort, and they were less focused on visualization. So everything I did had to be visualization focused, but they were a little bit more well then could you as a side project work on, just a numerical analysis in Python, right, a neural network or something, which I would have really enjoyed doing, but it wasn't explicitly part of my PhD. So there was that dichotomy there. They were just little bits, separated from visualization. They liked visualization, and I knew that was the point, but I think they would have liked a little bit of non-visualization as well.
Good answer. Okay. Why don't you have any user studies in your thesis?
So, the way I see it is that for research to be published, really, it has to be novel and it has to be useful. So the novelty is something that it's relatively objective. You can say this hasn't been done before. Sometimes there's a little bit of a grey area, but the usefulness is what the user study tests. And really, the best way to test this these software applications was going directly to the people who know the data. If we'd have taken it to, if we'd run a user study with a bunch of students, I feel bad if it wasn't. If you run the user study with a bunch of students, they would be able to look at it and they'd go, oh, so what does this mean? I don't know anything about the data, and therefore it would be a useless user study. So we had to go through, and I think it was quite a useful process because it helped refine the software because it was iterative. We went back to them and said, okay, well, we've changed these things. What do you think now? But that's the reason why we used the main expert Viva, was because it's a very niche data set.
You can also say, that's a good answer. You can also back it up by saying, this software is not for general use. It's for use by a very special group of people at QPC.
Yeah.
So therefore, the evaluations don't need an expert in it.
I mean, aren't your domain experts your users?
Yes.
Yeah, they are essentially. So yeah, exactly. The
They're
users
one
are the
same,
users, so
right?
it is a user study in that sense. And there's a limited number of them, so you couldn't do a numerical analysis. So, that's a good point.
Okay. Any
other questions?
Question. It's about your position paper.
Oh yes.
As I recall, the challenges that you mentioned is quite common to anyone with different industries. So what do you provide in the paper? Is it like a framework or something?
Sorry, say that again?
What's the takeaways from the paper? Is it like a framework or something?
So the takeaway is, I interviewed, so in the paper I interviewed a bunch of people there's a digital festival in Cardiff, it's sort of for tech entrepreneurs. There were a good number of people there, and Swansea were there representing the new competition foundry. And I went along to help out, and as part of that I talked to a lot of entrepreneurs about collaborating with industry, with academia, sorry. And I just got their views on it, so I wrote down a lot of things they said, so I got that perspective. And then I also interviewed our industry partner, and we got a bunch of really useful things from them. So it's it's basically just the collection of both experiences, what both people want, and bringing that together and maybe making some suggestions as to how that works practically. And then it makes a few very small suggestions about how, if you want to start up a collaboration, what you should do, and what things should be clearly defined before entering a relationship, and what the expectations should be. So that's really what the paper is doing.
Just out of kind of for fun, I think one of the big kind of conflicts, you could say, between the visualization scientists or researchers or specialists or whatever you want to call it, and the rest of the world, not just industry, is a little bit what Rich touched on, which is time and effort. So the problem with visualization is it's difficult. It takes a long time, and it takes a lot of effort. And unless you've done it firsthand, you don't know this when you're on the outside. So you think, can I have this tree map that shows an overview? And they think, oh, it should take a week. That's actually very common. That's not just particular to visualization, it's particular to all software development. Oh, that feature should be really easy, right? It should take a week or 2 weeks or whatever. So that's one of the tensions is just how much time and effort it takes to get a good quality visual design and a good quality piece of software working. You know, the expectations are much different in terms of time, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I'm always chuckling in the back of my head, actually, during these meetings, going, you know, because I know about that, but I know that we won't be able to like deliver some shiny piece of software for another year or something like that. You know?
Yeah. Because I think it also a lot of the time when they develop a prototype, they get some dummy data. They do it in JavaScript, so it's much quicker to do. We're doing it in C++ and OpenGL. Like, the hardcore way of doing visualization is not really a more difficult way because we get more control. So I think they're just expectations because their experience of doing that sort of thing. They don't think about the whole. Like when they did they produced these visualizations. It was all D3 stuff. But they never linked it to their back end. I would imagine if they were to link it to their actual data set, they would come up with loads of problems and reasons why.
Sorry, but you should just go with a t-shirt on C++ and visualization master race. Because as soon as you said that made me think of the PC master race, the visualization master race.
Yeah, that's always a tension, though.
Yeah.
Always.
Okay.
Any other questions for Rich?
Questions?
I think you're much better prepared. Can I see
Yes, I can
your?
myself.
Just some comments on the slides and stuff. I would just remove the data slide. I don't think it's necessary.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
I would change the thesis structure slide to contributions.
Okay,
Like
good.
really, you want a contributions slide. And
So you go to the title.
I also have a comment. Be prepared to show your demo videos as well.
Okay.
Yeah, you want those easily accessible just in case.
Your survey slide, you did mention it, but they're kind of
So the dots.
so I don't know if you want to.
That's a good point. I haven't got the key there, you're right. What did you say for the title? Sorry, it's a full stop. You're right. My problem is I looked at that and thought, I spelled centre right because I wrote one paper in American English. And I think I have no idea now which way the American and which way the British is. I have absolutely no idea which the right way is.
Just stopped.
So
I just don't. I
think I just do it
I only
50-50.
type in American now.
Even then,
I'm going
I think
to the
it's
fear of
only
box
you, Rich.
confusing a lot.
You write in British language.
his modelling is it
I've
final?
kind of corrupted the system.
Let's do it.
It's visualization as well with the Zs. I had to do
Yeah,
Control
American.
F when I did my
Yeah.
thesis to make sure.
Did you write your thesis in British or?
So I had to convert the paraperformance paper.
If I wrote it in
But then
American
one quote.
English, would be that fine?
I wouldn't recommend it. Do you only write in British English if you're British?
Okay.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Because imagine me trying to correct Mohammed's work in British English. I wouldn't be able to do it properly. I would be missing words, things would
Well,
be inconsistent.
We're in Britain though.
And also, when I was in school, in Italy,
I wouldn't be able to do it. I don't have that ability.
they would teach us British English and say this is the proper way, and they would mark us errors every time we would use Americans. It's true. I'm not lying. Like my teachers would mark me wrong every time I would use American spelling. So they drilled it into us that that is the way.
Yeah. I had the same.
The empire is alive.
Any other questions and comments? This is a special gift for you, Rich.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We'll try to make sure that's all done.
How long is it?